My name is Clyde Montgomery, 67 years old, and I built a business worth millions with nothing but determination and my own two hands. When my beloved wife Katherine passed, our only son Jackson seemed devastated. But the day he received his $63 million inheritance, something in his eyes changed. 2 weeks later, he handed me eviction papers for the home I built. As I placed a single key on the table with a note before walking away, he had no idea what was coming. If you have ever been betrayed by family, hit subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, in a small town where everyone knew your business and poverty was just a fact of life. My father worked at the local steel mill until his back gave out, and my mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families across town. We never had much, but they taught me the value of honest work and integrity. By 15, I was already working after school at the local hardware store, saving every penny I could. College seemed like an impossible dream, but I earned a partial scholarship and worked 2 jobs to pay my way through. That is where I met Katherine Sinclair during my sophomore year at Penn State. She came from money, old money from Boston, but you would never know it from how she carried herself. No pretension, no airs, just a brilliant mind and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. "You have ambition in your eyes, Clyde Montgomery," she told me on our first date. "I have a feeling you are going to build something extraordinary someday." Katherine believed in me before I fully believed in myself. When I shared my dream of starting a real estate development company that would build affordable but beautiful homes for working families, she did not just nod politely. She pulled out a notebook and started sketching floor plans right there in the coffee shop. We married right after graduation, against her parents' wishes. They had envisioned her with someone from their social circle, not some poor kid from Pennsylvania with big dreams and empty pockets. But Katherine never wavered. She used her trust fund as seed money for our first project, a small development of 20 affordable homes just outside Pittsburgh. Montgomery Real Estate Development was born from nothing but sweat and Katherine's unwavering faith. Those first years were brutal. We lived in a tiny apartment, pouring everything back into the business. I worked 18-hour days, handling everything from architectural reviews to swinging hammers alongside my small crew when necessary. Katherine managed the books, charmed the bankers, and somehow made our tiny apartment feel like a palace. When Jackson was born 5 years into our marriage, it felt like all our hard work had culminated in this perfect moment. I still remember holding him for the first time, this tiny human with Katherine's blue eyes and my stubborn chin. I promised him everything I never had growing up. "We will give him the world, but also teach him its value," Katherine said, always the wiser of us two. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong with that plan. As our company grew from local developments to regional and then national projects, my time at home shrank. Katherine shouldered the burden of raising Jackson while I built our empire. Business trips became longer, projects more complex, and the millions started rolling in. By Jackson's 10th birthday, we had moved into a mansion in the suburbs, complete with a pool, tennis courts, and more rooms than we could use. Katherine tried to instill values in our son, but I undermined her efforts without realizing it. When she would deny him some extravagance, I would swoop in on weekends and weekend trips, lavishing him with gifts and experiences to compensate for my absence. If she grounded him for poor grades, I would find excuses why he deserved another chance. If she insisted he get a summer job in high school, I would argue that networking at the country club with the right families was more important for his future. The warning signs appeared early. When Jackson was 16, he wrecked his first car, an expensive sports car I bought him despite Katherine's protests. Instead of consequences, I bought him another one. When he barely graduated high school with mediocre grades, I called in favors to get him into my alma mater. When he dropped out after 3 semesters of partying and failing classes, I created a vice president position for him at the company with no real responsibilities but a generous salary. "We are creating a monster, Clyde," Katherine warned me one night after Jackson had borrowed our yacht to throw a party that resulted in $20,000 in damages. "He thinks the world owes him everything without effort. He is young," I dismissed her concerns. "He will grow out of it. I just want him to have all the things I never had." But you never learned to appreciate what you have built because you never had to work for any of it, Katherine argued. That is the greatest gift your parents gave you, one we are denying our son. 3 years ago, Katherine was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was bleak from the start, but she faced it with the same grace and strength she had shown throughout our 40 years of marriage. During those final months, as the treatments failed one after another, she made me promise something. "Fix your relationship with our son before it is too late," she whispered one night, her once vibrant form now frail beneath the hospital blankets. "Not with money or position, but with truth and genuine connection. He needs a father, not a bank." I promised her I would try, tears streaming down my face, and I meant it. After she passed, I tried reaching out to Jackson in ways I never had before. I invited him for weekly dinners, suggested we take a fishing trip like the ones my father and I enjoyed in my youth, even offered to teach him the actual business rather than just letting him coast on his title. For a while, it seemed like Jackson was receptive. He started coming to the office more regularly, asking questions about projects, and even joined me for Sunday dinners at the house. But looking back, I realize his sudden interest coincided perfectly with learning about his inheritance. Katherine had left specific instructions with our family lawyer, Theodore Winters, about the distribution of assets after her death. Jackson would receive $63 million from her personal fortune and investments, while I would retain ownership of our company and our family home. What I did not know then was that Jackson's newfound interest in family bonding was nothing but a performance. He was simply biding his time until the money came through. Katherine slipped away on a Tuesday morning in April. The cherry trees she had planted around our property were in full bloom, painting the view from her bedroom window in shades of pink and white. I was holding her hand when she took her final breath, a peaceful smile on her face, as though she was having one final beautiful dream. Jackson was downstairs in the kitchen, on a business call he claimed could not wait. Even on that day, he had spent less than an hour at her bedside that morning before finding an excuse to step away. When I came down to tell him his mother was gone, he was discussing golf tee times for the following weekend. The funeral was held 3 days later at the small chapel where we had married all those years ago. Katherine had planned everything meticulously during her final months, specifying the music, the flowers, even the readings. She wanted a celebration of life, rather than a mournful affair, with bright colors instead of black. I delivered the eulogy with a breaking heart, sharing stories of Katherine's kindness, her brilliance, her unfailing moral compass. As I spoke about her dedication to our family, I noticed Jackson checking his watch repeatedly from the front row. Later, at the reception, I overheard him asking Theodore when they could schedule the will reading. "Your mother just been laid to rest," Theodore replied with poorly concealed disgust. "Perhaps we could discuss business matters next week." Theodore Winters had been our family lawyer for 30 years, a dignified man with silver hair and an old-school approach to both law and propriety. Katherine had trusted him implicitly, not just with our legal affairs, but as a friend and confidant. I later learned she had spent many hours with him in private meetings during her final months. A week after the funeral, Theodore called to arrange the formal reading of the will at his downtown office. Jackson arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in an expensive new suit, practically vibrating with anticipation. "Before we begin," Theodore said solemnly, "I want to express that Katherine was very specific about certain conditions regarding the distribution of assets." Jackson leaned forward eagerly. "What conditions?" "Mom never mentioned any conditions." Theodore adjusted his glasses. "There is a 6-month waiting period before the inheritance can be distributed. Katherine believed this would allow for a proper period of mourning and reflection." The color drained from Jackson's face. 6 months? That is ridiculous. I have plans, investments lined up. Why would she do this? Your mother believed in doing things properly, Theodore replied simply. These were her wishes, and they are legally binding. For the next 6 months, I tried to use this time as Katherine had surely intended, to rebuild my relationship with my son. I suggested we work together on a memorial project for Katherine, perhaps a wing at the local children's hospital she had supported for years. Jackson agreed half-heartedly, showing up to one planning meeting before sending his assistant to the rest. I invited him to dinner weekly, trying to engage him in meaningful conversation, to finally know my own son as an adult. He would come, but conversations inevitably circled back to his inheritance and what he planned to do once the money was his. "I'm thinking about a place in Malibu," he mentioned casually over dinner one evening. "Right on the beach, 8 bedrooms. Perfect for entertaining." "That sounds extravagant," I replied carefully. "Your mother always preferred investments that would grow over time rather than luxury purchases." Jackson's expression hardened. "Well, it will be my money soon. I think I have earned the right to enjoy it." "Earned it?" I could not help asking. "Jackson, this is your mother's legacy to you. What exactly do you think you did to earn $63 million? "I put up with all the lectures about responsibility and hard work," he snapped. "I listened to her go on and on about giving back and community service and all that nonsense. Now I get to live my life my way." I sat in stunned silence, seeing for the first time exactly what Katherine had warned me about for years. Our son viewed his inheritance not as a blessing or responsibility, but as payment for tolerating his parents' values. Over the following weeks, I noticed Jackson meeting with real estate agents and financial advisors. One afternoon, I came home to find luxury car brochures spread across the kitchen counter, all for vehicles costing well over $200,000. Another day, I discovered travel itineraries for extended yacht tours of the Mediterranean and private island rentals in the Caribbean. When I went to his room to return a jacket he had left at the office, I found detailed renovation plans for our family home hidden in his desk drawer. The plans showed Katherine's beloved English garden, replaced with a massive pool and entertainment area. Her art studio, where she had painted for decades, was labeled as the future site of a home theater and gaming room. It became painfully clear that Jackson was simply waiting for the money, making plans to erase his mother's presence from our home, and counting the days until he could break free from what remained of our family. The realization broke my heart all over again. I had failed Katherine in the most fundamental way. Despite my promises at her deathbed, I had not managed to forge a genuine connection with our son. Worse, I had to face the uncomfortable truth that the entitled, callous young man waiting impatiently for his inheritance was largely my creation. Every time I had undermined Katherine's attempts to teach him values, every time I had solved his problems with money rather than guidance, I had contributed to this outcome. As the 6-month mark approached, Jackson became increasingly impatient, calling Theodore repeatedly to confirm the exact date and time when the funds would be transferred. He stopped pretending to be interested in family dinners or company business, his true nature fully visible now that the finish line was in sight. I found myself alone in the large house most evenings, sitting in Katherine's garden, wondering how I could have done things differently. The roses she had tended so carefully were blooming without her, and I talked to them sometimes, imagining she could hear me through them. "I tried, Katherine," I whispered one evening, "but I think it might be too late." The day of the official will execution arrived 6 months, and one day after Katherine's passing, Theodore had arranged for us to meet at his office in the historic district downtown, a beautiful brownstone that had housed his law practice for 3 generations. Jackson arrived in a brand new luxury sports car, parking it haphazardly in front of the building. He bounded up the steps with an energy I had not seen since he was a child on Christmas morning. Theodore's office reflected the gravitas of old money and traditional values, with dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books lining the walls, and the subtle scent of fine cigars and furniture polish. Family photos on his desk showed 3 generations of his own family, along with a small framed picture of him and Katherine at a charity event the year before her diagnosis. We sat in the high-backed leather chairs across from Theodore's massive oak desk, while his assistant brought in coffee and water. Jackson declined both, checking his watch and tapping his foot impatiently. "Can we get on with this?" he asked. "I have meetings this afternoon." Theodore gave him a measured look before opening an elegant leather portfolio. "Of course, I will read the relevant portions of Katherine Montgomery's last will and testament." He cleared his throat and began reading in his formal courtroom voice. "To my son, Jackson Montgomery, I bequeath the sum of $63 million from my personal accounts and investments to be transferred in full on this day. It is my hope that he will use these funds wisely and in keeping with the values his father and I have attempted to instill throughout his life." Jackson could barely contain his smile, already pulling out his phone to check his banking app. To my beloved husband, Clyde Montgomery, Theodore continued, I leave our family home and all its contents, with the hope that he will preserve the memories we created there together for as long as he wishes. The reading continued with smaller bequests to charities and longtime staff members. But Jackson had stopped listening, already on the phone with his financial advisor confirming the transfer was underway. As soon as Theodore concluded, Jackson stood and shook his hand perfunctorily. Is that all? Everything is transferred now? He asked. Theodore nodded. The funds should appear in your accounts within the hour, as per the arrangements we made last week. Perfect, Jackson said, turning to me with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Congratulations, Dad. Looks like we both got what we wanted. Before I could respond, he was out the door, already calling friends to celebrate. Theodore and I sat in silence for a moment after he left. Katherine worried about him, Theodore said finally, studying my face. She worried a great deal. We both did, I admitted, though I think she saw the problem more clearly than I ever allowed myself to. Theodore seemed on the verge of saying something else, then appeared to think better of it. Time will tell, Clyde. Time will tell. For the next 3 weeks, I barely saw Jackson. His new wealth gave him the freedom he had apparently been craving, and he disappeared on a whirlwind tour of excess. Social media posts showed him in Vegas, Miami, and New York, surrounded by new friends and spending money as though it might evaporate if not used immediately. He bought 3 new cars, a luxury condo in downtown, and according to his assistant, put a down payment on a yacht. Just when I had begun to think he might simply vanish from my life entirely, he appeared at the house unannounced on a Tuesday morning, accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits carrying briefcases. Dad, he said, with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. We need to talk business. The men with him were introduced as representatives from Blackwell and Associates, one of the most aggressive corporate law firms in the city. They sat at our kitchen table, the same table where Katherine and I had shared thousands of meals with our son, and opened their briefcases with practiced precision. Mr. Montgomery, the older of the 2, began. Your son has asked us to review certain assets of Montgomery Real Estate Development, specifically as they relate to this property. What are you talking about? I asked, looking between them and Jackson, who was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, that strange smile still playing on his lips. This house, Jackson said simply. It is not just our family home, Dad. It was the first official headquarters of Montgomery Development. You registered the business here 40 years ago. That was just a formality, I said, confused. We moved to proper offices downtown 38 years ago. The younger lawyer slid a document across the table. According to the original incorporation papers, this property was listed as an asset of the company. It was never formally transferred to personal ownership. I stared at the papers, my mind racing. That is just a technical oversight. Everyone knows this is our family home. Katherine and I raised you here. Jackson shrugged. Technical or not, it means the house is a company asset. And while Mom left you the house in her will, she could only leave what was legally hers to give. Since the house is technically a company asset, and I now own significant shares in the company through my inheritance. You cannot be serious, I said, the realization of what was happening finally dawning on me. You want to take the house? Your mother's house? Business is business, Dad. You taught me that. Jackson's voice was cold, all pretense of filial affection gone. I am planning to sell it. The property alone is worth $7 million, and with some renovations, it could fetch closer to 10. I already have interested buyers. This is our home, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I need you to vacate the premises within 30 days. Jackson continued as if I had not spoken. My lawyers have prepared the necessary paperwork. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and saw nothing of Katherine or myself in his eyes. Just a cold calculation and the satisfaction of someone who believes they have won. Why? I asked simply. You have $63 million. Why do you need this house too? Jackson's mask slipped for a moment, revealing something ugly beneath. Because I can. Because for years I listened to you and Mom talk about hard work and earning things, while you lived in luxury. Now it is my turn. My money. My rules. He slid the eviction papers across the table. 30 days, Dad. I have movers coming on the 31st day. Whatever is not gone by then gets tossed. The days that followed passed in a fog of disbelief and heartache. I kept expecting Jackson to call, to say it had been a horrible joke or momentary madness. But the only communication I received was from his lawyers, formal emails reminding me of the approaching deadline and requesting access for appraisers and contractors to begin measuring for renovations. I spent hours on the phone with my own lawyers, searching for some legal recourse. But Jackson had been thorough. The oversight in the property registration 40 years ago created just enough of a legal gray area that fighting would mean years in court with no guarantee of success. I could contest it, my lawyer explained gently. But with his resources and the legal ambiguity, this could drag on for 5 years or more, and the court might still rule in his favor in the end. I wandered through the rooms of our home like a ghost, touching Katherine's things, remembering the life we had built together. Our bedroom still smelled faintly of her perfume. Her books remained on the nightstand, a bookmark still holding her place in the novel she had been reading when she became too ill to continue. Her garden bloomed outside, following the careful schedule of plantings she had maintained for decades. 2 weeks into the 30-day period, Jackson showed up with a team of interior designers and architects. They walked through the house, measuring and discussing walls to remove, talking about the property as if I was not even present. "We will gut this entire wing," Jackson told a woman with a tablet who was taking notes. "The master suite needs to be at least twice this size." They stood in the doorway of Katherine's art studio, with her paintings still on the walls and her brushes still in their holders. "This whole room gets demolished," Jackson said dismissively. "Terrible light anyway. We will put in the home theater here, with stadium seating and a projection system." "Your mother loved this room," I said quietly from behind them. "She painted here every morning for 30 years. Jackson barely glanced at me. "Well, she does not need it anymore, does she?" Something in me broke at those words. A final thread of hope that my son might still possess some shred of decency or respect for his mother's memory. But I said nothing, turning away before he could see the tears in my eyes. As the deadline approached, I began the painful process of packing up 40 years of memories. What does one take when leaving the only real home they have ever known? Katherine's clothes still hung in her closet. Her jewelry box still sat on the dresser. Each item I touched carried a memory, a moment from our shared life. I carefully wrapped her favorite paintings, the ones she had created herself, securing them in bubble wrap and placing them in sturdy art boxes. I packed photo albums chronicling our life together, from our wedding day through Jackson's childhood and beyond. Crystal vases from anniversaries, the quilt her grandmother had made for our wedding, the collection of seashells from our vacations to coastal Maine every summer. 25 days in, Jackson sent a professional moving company with instructions to speed things up. The movers were apologetic but firm, boxing items quickly with little regard for sentiment or fragility. I stood in the midst of this dismantling of my life, feeling powerless to stop the tide. "Where should we send these boxes, sir?" the foreman asked. I realized I had been so consumed with the loss of my home that I had not even secured a new place to live. A colleague had offered his guest house temporarily, but beyond that, I had made no plans. At 67 years old, I was essentially homeless. "I will give you an address soon," I told him, the humiliation burning in my chest. The 29th day arrived with a cruel spring sunshine bathing the property in golden light. Jackson had informed me he was having a renovation kickoff party the following day, with contractors, designers, and friends all coming to celebrate the transformation of the property. I had one final day to say goodbye to the home where I had loved, lost, and lived for 4 decades. I spent my last evening in Katherine's garden, sitting on the wrought iron bench where she used to read in the summer. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance heavy in the evening air. I ran my hand along the smooth wood of the bench, worn from years of use. "I am so sorry, Katherine," I whispered, tears flowing freely now that I was alone. "I failed you. I failed our son, and now I have lost our home too." As I sat there in my grief, my hand drifted to the small compartment Katherine had built into the arm of the bench, to hold her gardening gloves and small tools. To my surprise, I felt something unfamiliar inside, an envelope that had not been there before. I pulled it out, immediately recognizing Katherine's elegant handwriting. For Clyde, when you need it most. My hands trembled as I opened it, finding a letter written in the final weeks of her life. My dearest Clyde, it began. If you are reading this, then things with Jackson have gone as I feared they might. I have always seen what you could not allow yourself to see, that our son has grown into a man without compassion or true understanding of value. This is not entirely his fault, nor is it entirely ours, but it is the reality we must face. I read on, my heart pounding, as Katherine revealed that she had anticipated this very scenario. I know our son, Clyde. I know his greed and his entitlement. I know that once the money is in his hands, he will want more, and the house will be his next target. So I have prepared for this contingency, with Theodore's help. The letter mentioned a second will and directed me to a key hidden beneath a loose brick in the garden wall, behind the climbing roses. With shaking hands, I found the brick she described and retrieved a small key with a tag bearing the name of a downtown bank. This is not the end, my love, Katherine's letter concluded. This is simply the moment when the lessons we failed to teach our son in life must be taught in another way. Go see Theodore tomorrow. He knows what to do. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt the faintest glimmer of hope, and beneath it, the steady hand of Katherine still guiding me, still fighting for our family even from beyond. The next morning, I called Theodore's office as soon as they opened. His secretary recognized the urgency in my voice and scheduled an immediate appointment. I arrived clutching Katherine's letter and the mysterious key, unsure what to expect but trusting in my wife's foresight. Theodore welcomed me into his office, his expression grave but not surprised. You found her letter, he stated rather than asked. You knew about this, I asked, sinking into the leather chair across from his desk. Katherine and I spent many hours planning during her final months, Theodore explained, removing his glasses and polishing them methodically. She was a remarkable woman, Clyde. She saw things clearly, including the potential consequences of Jackson receiving such wealth without having earned it. She mentioned a second will, I said, placing the key on his desk. And this, Theodore nodded, examining the key. Yes, this opens a safe deposit box at First National. Katherine established it 15 years ago, without your knowledge or Jackson's. She has been preparing for this possibility for a very long time. 15 years? I repeated, stunned. But Jackson was still in college then. Katherine saw the warning signs long before you were willing to acknowledge them, Theodore said gently. She loved Jackson fiercely, but she was not blind to his flaws. She observed his behavior with money, his attitude toward privilege, his lack of appreciation for what you both had built. And she began to plan. Theodore opened his desk drawer and removed a sealed envelope with my name on it, written in Katherine's hand. She left this with me, with instructions to give it to you only if Jackson took legal action regarding the house. I opened it with trembling fingers, finding another letter and a set of legal documents. My darling Clyde, Katherine wrote, if you are reading this, then our son has chosen greed over family, as I feared he might. What Jackson does not know, what no one knows except Theodore and myself, is that the will reads 6 months after my death is not my only will. It is what I call will number 1, a test of character for our son. I looked up at Theodore in confusion. He nodded encouragingly for me to continue reading. The $63 million Jackson has received is real, Katherine's letter continued, but it represents less than a third of our actual worth. The bulk of our fortune, including controlling interest in Montgomery Development, remains in trust, contingent upon Jackson's behavior following the initial inheritance. Theodore leaned forward. Katherine set conditions, Clyde. Very specific conditions. If Jackson showed compassion, responsibility, and respect for family legacy after receiving the initial inheritance, the remainder would transfer to him on his 35th birthday. But if he used the money selfishly, especially if he attempted to claim the house, then what happens? I asked, my mind struggling to comprehend the scope of Katherine's plan. Then will number 2 activates, Theodore explained. The safe deposit box contains the documents executing the secondary will, which revokes Jackson's claim to the remaining assets and places them under your control. I stared at the key on the desk. How much are we talking about, Theodore? The total value of Montgomery Development and all associated holdings is just over $200 million, Theodore said quietly. Jackson received $63 million from Katherine's personal accounts. The remaining assets, approximately $140 million, are addressed in the second will. The magnitude of what Katherine had done began to sink in. She had created a test for our son, offering him a fortune but watching to see what he would do with it. And he had failed spectacularly. Does the second will address the house specifically? I asked. Theodore nodded. It reestablishes your clear ownership, correcting the oversight in the original business registration. Katherine had the foresight to have the proper paperwork drawn up years ago, ready to be filed if necessary. What about Jackson? I asked. This will destroy him. Theodore's expression softened. Katherine considered that too. The second will does not disinherit Jackson completely. It places the bulk of the assets in your control, with specific provisions for how Jackson might earn his way back into responsible ownership. She believed in second chances, Clyde, but not in rewarding destructive behavior. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing the contents of the safe deposit box after retrieving it from the bank. Katherine had been meticulous in her planning, considering every legal angle and potential challenge. The documents were airtight, prepared by specialists in estate law, and reviewed regularly over the years. When can we execute these documents? I asked finally. Immediately, Theodore replied. In fact, Katherine left specific instructions about timing. She wanted Jackson to fully believe he had won, to celebrate his victory before learning the truth. She thought that would make the lesson more meaningful. He is having a renovation party at the house today, I said. Contractors, designers, friends, all there to celebrate tearing apart Katherine's home. Theodore's expression hardened slightly. Then perhaps today is the perfect time for Jackson to learn about will number 2. I left Theodore's office with a briefcase containing the executed documents and a new sense of purpose. Katherine had given me one final gift. Not just the means to reclaim our home, but the opportunity to try once more to teach our son the values we had failed to instill during his upbringing. As I drove toward the house, I found myself thinking not of victory or revenge, but of responsibility. What would Katherine want me to do with this power? How could I use it to honor her wish that Jackson learn the lessons he so desperately needed? By the time I turned onto our street, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The driveway was filled with expensive cars when I arrived, music spilling from the open windows of our home. I parked on the street and walked slowly up the path, carrying only a small suitcase of personal items and the briefcase Theodore had given me. Through the open front door, I could see Jackson holding court in the living room, champagne glass in hand, surrounded by people I had never met. Large display boards showed renderings of the planned renovations, with Katherine's carefully designed spaces completely erased and replaced with ostentatious luxury. The room fell silent as I entered, conversations dying mid-sentence as heads turned toward me. Jackson's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Dad, what are you doing here?" he demanded, setting down his glass and striding toward me. "You were supposed to be gone yesterday. The movers said they cleared everything out." "I had one last thing to take care of," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "And something to leave for you." Jackson glanced awkwardly at his guests, clearly uncomfortable with this unplanned confrontation. "This is not a good time. We are in the middle of something here." "I can see that," I replied, looking around at the strangers drinking champagne in Katherine's home, celebrating your renovation plans. An interior designer nearby gestured excitedly to one of the display boards. "Mr. Montgomery, we were just discussing the master suite expansion. By removing the east wall and incorporating the adjacent room, we can create a truly spectacular space." That adjacent room was my wife's art studio, I said quietly. She painted there every morning for 30 years. An uncomfortable silence fell over the gathering. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware they were witnessing something deeply personal. Jackson's jaw tightened. "Dad, I think you should leave. Now. This is my house, And these are my guests." I nodded slowly, reaching into my pocket. "You are right, Jackson. I am leaving. But first, I wanted to give you this." I placed a single key on the antique table by the door, the one Katherine had lovingly restored the summer Jackson was born. Beside it, I placed a small handwritten note. "What is this?" Jackson asked, eyeing the key suspiciously. "This is for you," I said, tapping the note. "It opens the truth." Jackson frowned, picking up the note and reading it with confusion spreading across his face. I turned and walked toward the door, my small suitcase in hand. "That is it?" Jackson called after me, incredulous. "You just came to leave a cryptic note and some random key? What game are you playing, Dad?" I paused at the threshold, turning to face my son one last time. "No games, Jackson. Just one final lesson from your mother. She always was the wiser of us two." With that, I walked out, closing the door behind me. As I reached my car, I could see through the window as Jackson examined the key more closely, reading the tag attached to it. "Safe Deposit Box #247, First National Bank." I drove away as Jackson rushed out to his car, the party forgotten in his sudden urgency to discover what the key might unlock. I checked into a small hotel downtown, waiting for the inevitable phone call. It came 3 hours later. Theodore called to inform me that Jackson had appeared at his office in a state of shock and rage after visiting the bank and discovering the contents of the safe deposit box. He demanded explanations, Theodore reported. I gave him the legal documents and Katherine's letter to him. He read it right there in my office, his face going through quite a remarkable range of emotions. "And?" I asked, and he stormed out, saying his lawyers would be in touch. I told him they were welcome to review the documents, but Katherine's preparations were thorough. "Will number 2 is legally binding and executed as of this morning." "What happens next?" I asked. "That depends on you, Clyde," Theodore replied. "The assets are now under your control, including the house and the company. Katherine left the next steps in your hands." I thanked him and ended the call, sitting on the edge of the hotel bed in the quiet room. For the first time in months, I felt Katherine's presence strongly, as though she was sitting right beside me. What would she want me to do now? The answer came to me with perfect clarity. This was never about punishing Jackson. It was about teaching him, giving him one last chance to become the man we had always hoped he could be. My phone rang again near midnight. Jackson's name flashed on the screen. "Hello, son," I answered. His voice was raw, anger mixed with hurt and confusion. "Why did she do this? Why did she set me up like this?" "She did not set you up, Jackson. She gave you a test, one she genuinely hoped you would pass. She wanted to see what kind of man you had become." "By tricking me?" he demanded. "By giving you enough rope to either climb or hang yourself," I corrected gently. "She gave you $63 million with no strings attached. What you chose to do with that windfall revealed your character, not her trickery." There was a long silence on the line. "So, that is it? I am disinherited?" "Not exactly," I said. "If you read all the documents, you will see that Katherine left room for redemption. The question is whether you want it badly enough." "What does that mean?" Jackson asked, his voice smaller now. "It means we need to talk, son. Not as adversaries, but as family. Can you meet me at Theodore's office tomorrow morning at 9? After a pause, he agreed, and we ended the call. I lay awake most of the night, thinking about second chances and the opportunity Katherine had engineered for both Jackson and myself. She had given me the chance to be the father I should have been all along, firm but loving, holding our son accountable while still believing in his potential for growth. The next morning, Jackson arrived at Theodore's office looking haggard and subdued, the arrogant Victor of yesterday replaced by a young man facing serious consequences for the first time in his life. Theodore recused himself after initial greetings, leaving us alone in his conference room. "I spoke to 3 different lawyers last night," Jackson began without preamble. "They all say the same thing. Mom's second will is ironclad. I have no legal recourse." "That is correct," I confirmed. Katherine was thorough. "So what now?" he asked bitterly. "You take everything? The house, the company, all of it?" "No, Jackson. I give you a choice." I slid a folder across the table to him. Inside was a proposal I had stayed up all night drafting, my own addendum to Katherine's plan. Option 1. You keep the $63 million you have already received, which is more than most people will see in a lifetime. You live your life however you choose, but you relinquish all claims to Montgomery Development and the family home. We become estranged, as you seem to want. Jackson's jaw tightened, but he nodded for me to continue. Option 2. You return to the company, not as vice president or heir apparent, but as an entry-level project manager. You work your way up based on merit, not blood relation. You prove yourself worthy of the legacy your mother and I built. If you succeed, over time, you earn back your place in the company and the family. You want me to work as a regular employee? Jackson asked incredulously. For how long? For as long as it takes to demonstrate that you understand the value of what Katherine and I built, I replied simply. It could be 5 years. It could be 10. That depends entirely on you. And the $63 million I already have, that remains yours either way. Katherine gave it to you, and neither she nor I would take it back. But the path back to the full inheritance runs through hard work and earned respect, not entitlement. Jackson stared at the proposal for a long time, his face unreadable. Finally, he looked up, eyes glistening with what might have been the first genuine emotion I had seen from him in years. She knew me better than I thought, he said quietly. Better than I knew myself. She loved you, Jackson. We both do. But love does not mean giving someone everything they want. Sometimes it means challenging them to be better. I need time to think, he said, standing abruptly. Take all the time you need, I replied. The offer stands. As he reached the door, he paused, turning back with a question that suggested the first crack in his armor of entitlement. The house, he said hesitantly. Will you move back in? Yes, I answered simply. It is home. He nodded once, then left without another word. Whether he would choose redemption or independence remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about my son's future. Katherine had given us both one last chance to get it right. The following weeks passed in a strange limbo. I moved back into our home, spending the first few days simply undoing the damage from the hasty packing and moving. Katherine's paintings returned to their places on the walls, her books to the shelves, her garden tools to the shed where she had meticulously organized them. Jackson remained silent, neither accepting nor rejecting my offer. Theodore reported that he had liquidated several recent purchases, including the downtown condo and 2 of his new sports cars. Whether this indicated financial prudence or preparation for a permanent separation from the family, I could not tell. I returned to work at Montgomery Development, throwing myself into the daily operations that had once been my entire focus. But this time, I made sure to leave the office by 5 each day, spending my evenings in Katherine's garden or reading the books she had loved in the quiet of our home. 3 weeks after our meeting at Theodore's office, Jackson appeared at the house on a Sunday morning. He stood awkwardly on the porch, holding a small potted plant, a cutting from the Japanese maple Katherine had planted the year he was born. I thought maybe we could plant this somewhere in the garden, he said by way of greeting. If that is okay. I invited him in, offering coffee, which he accepted. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where his lawyers had served me eviction papers, but the energy was entirely different now. I have been doing a lot of thinking, Jackson began hesitantly, about Mom, about you, about the kind of person I have become. I remained silent, giving him space to continue. I was angry at first, he admitted. I felt betrayed, humiliated. But then I started reading Mom's journals that were in the safe deposit box. Her observations about me over the years, her hopes, her worries. It was like hearing her voice again. But this time I was actually listening. He took a deep breath. I want to take option 2. I want to earn my way back, not just to the money or the company, but to being someone Mom would have been proud of. Someone I can be proud of. The relief and hope I felt must have shown on my face, because Jackson continued with more confidence. I know it will not be easy. I know I have a lot to prove, to you and to everyone else at the company, but I want to try. That is all either of us ever wanted, son, I said, reaching across the table to grasp his hand briefly. a genuine effort. The transition was not smooth. Jackson started the following Monday as a project manager, overseeing a small affordable housing development on the east side of the city. The same employees who had once reported to him as vice president now gave him assignments and evaluated his performance. His initial resentment was obvious, but to his credit, he persevered. I established clear boundaries with his supervisors, making it explicit that Jackson should receive no special treatment. He would be evaluated on the same criteria as any other employee, with the same opportunities for advancement or discipline. It was the structure and accountability Katherine and I should have provided years ago. To my surprise, after the initial shock wore off, Jackson began to thrive under the new arrangement. The affordable housing project came in under budget and ahead of schedule, earning him recognition from the senior management team. He volunteered for the most challenging assignments and worked longer hours than anyone else on his team. 6 months into the new arrangement, I established the Katherine Montgomery Foundation, dedicated to arts education for disadvantaged youth and affordable housing initiatives. Her two great passions. I appointed a board of trustees from outside the family to ensure its independence and donated $20 million as initial funding. When I announced the foundation at a company event, Jackson approached me afterwards with an unexpected proposal. "I want to donate $5 million from my personal funds to Mom's foundation," he said, "and I would like to volunteer with the arts program on weekends, if that would be appropriate." It was the first time he had voluntarily suggested parting with his inheritance for something other than personal luxury, and I fought back tears as I accepted his offer. Over the next year and a half, our relationship slowly healed. We established a tradition of Sunday dinners at the house, sometimes joined by Theodore or close family friends. We talked about Katherine often, sharing memories I had never heard and stories he had forgotten. For the first time since he was a small boy, I felt like I was truly getting to know my son. At work, Jackson earned a promotion to senior project manager based on his performance, without any intervention from me. His colleagues, initially skeptical of the boss's son working among them, gradually came to respect his work ethic and genuine commitment. On the second anniversary of Katherine's passing, we planted a new rose garden in her honor, carefully following the sketches we found in her gardening journal. As we worked together in the spring sunshine, Jackson paused, leaning on his shovel. "Do you think she would be proud of me now?" he asked, vulnerability plain in his voice. "I know she would," I replied honestly. "She always believed this version of you existed beneath the entitlement. She never gave up on that belief, even when I nearly did." Jackson nodded, returning to his digging with renewed purpose. "I think about that key a lot," he said after a while. "The one you left on the table that day. How it changed everything." Keys have that power, I reflected. They can lock things away or open new possibilities. Katherine understood that better than anyone. By the third year, Jackson had earned a position on the company's executive committee, based solely on merit and results. His proposal for expanding our affordable housing division had won accolades from industry peers and community organizations alike. In his personal life, he had sold his remaining sports car and moved into a modest condo near the office. The young man obsessed with status symbols and luxury had been replaced by someone who found satisfaction in achievement and contribution. One evening, as we finished our regular Sunday dinner, Jackson brought up the subject we had both carefully avoided for years. "The second will," he said. "The conditions for fully rejoining the company ownership. Do you think I am getting close?" I considered the question carefully. Katherine left that judgment to me. She trusted me to know when you were ready for that responsibility. "And what do you think?" he pressed. "I think you have made remarkable progress," I answered honestly. "But I also think Katherine was right about the time frame. 5 years minimum," she specified. "We are just past 3. There is value in the journey, son, not just the destination." To my surprise, Jackson nodded in agreement. "I used to think the money was the prize," he said thoughtfully. "But I understand now what Mom was trying to show me. The real inheritance is not the millions. It is the values, the work ethic, the sense of purpose you both built your lives around." Those words, more than any business success, told me that Katherine's plan had worked. Our son was finally becoming the man we had always hoped he could be. Today, nearly 4 years after that key moment, Jackson continues to earn his way back, step by step. The company thrives under our shared vision, with a renewed commitment to the community values Katherine championed. The foundation has expanded its programs to 3 states, touching thousands of lives. Our family home remains a sanctuary, Katherine's garden more beautiful than ever. I still talk to her there, especially in the early mornings when the light filters through the trees just as she loved. I tell her about Jackson's progress, about the man he is becoming, and I feel her presence in the gentle breeze that stirs the roses. The journey has taught me that true inheritance is not measured in dollars but in values transmitted from one generation to the next. Money can reveal character, but it does not have to define it. Second chances are possible when they come with both love and accountability. Katherine knew this all along. In her wisdom, she created a path for both Jackson and myself to find our way back to what truly matters. Not wealth or property or power, but integrity, purpose, and genuine connection. As Jackson and I work side by side in her garden, planting new seeds for the coming season, I see the future she envisioned, taking root and beginning to bloom. It is a legacy worth far more than $63 million. A legacy of growth, redemption, and unconditional but clear-eyed love. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between wealth and values in your own family? Or watched someone learn a hard but necessary lesson about what truly matters in life? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story of second chances resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more reflections on family, legacy, and the true meaning of inheritance. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the most valuable gifts come disguised as our greatest challenges.